Hey guys, tonight we're stepping quietly into a world that probably feels impossibly strict, cold, and eerily silent. You trudge across the worn stone floor of a medieval monastery, the air smelling faintly of wood smoke, damp straw, and the persistent tang of ink from manuscripts that never seem to leave the shelves. And, well, you probably won't survive this if you imagine yourself bending to every single rule, because these monks took discipline to a level that borders on obsessive. But tonight, we'll stroll together through their strange, rigid routines, see the quirks that made them human, and laugh gently at the absurdity while imagining the austere atmosphere that shaped centuries of devotion. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Don't forget to post your location and local time in the comments so we can feel the geography of your sleepy evenings. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The monastery is a quiet, almost sacred maze of corridors, cloisters, and chapels, and as you pad along the flagstone halls, you notice how carefully measured everything is. Every footstep echoes in the stone, reminding you that here, even silence carries weight. Candles flicker faintly in sconces, casting shadows that seem to sway with the rhythm of your heartbeat, and somewhere, a bell tolls, not loudly, but with deliberate precision, marking a time that isn't really yours to control. Even the way monks greet one another is a ritual. A slight nod, a lowered gaze, a hand pressed lightly to the chest. You feel conspicuous in your modern awareness of body language. Their world is defined by an intricate balance of obedience and subtle observation. You notice that the robes, cowl hoods, and simple sandals are never quite wrinkled, never quite careless, as if every fold carries a moral statement. It's strange. You can almost feel centuries of expectation pressed into the weave of their wool and linen. Yet, amid this solemnity, there's an unexpected tenderness. One monk quietly straightens a leaning candle, another traces a careful line in a parchment with a quill, and you catch yourself admiring the meditative focus. There's a rhythm here, a deliberate cadence that hums beneath the surface, and even though you're a modern intruder in their carefully constructed order, you begin to sense why they might have believed this was the path to inner clarity. You lean against a cold wall and take a deep breath, inhaling the mixture of smoke, herbs, and ink that has infused the air for decades. It's grounding, almost hypnotic, and you realize that this first evening isn't just about rules and punishment, it's about immersion. You are learning, slowly, that every rule is a thread in a much larger tapestry of ritual, devotion, and yes, human eccentricity. Historians still argue whether such discipline truly improved spiritual life or simply created an elaborate theater of control. But tonight, it's your theater, and you are both audience and reluctant actor. By the time your eyes adjust to the dim candlelight, you start noticing the faint signs of individuality peeking through, a slightly crooked quill stroke, a murmured prayer that seems improvisational, a half-hidden smile when a novice missteps. These tiny deviations from perfection hint at the humanity simmering beneath layers of rule and expectation. You can almost hear the monks' collective sighs, their subtle frustrations, and the occasional bursts of cleverness that slip past the monastery's ironclad code, as if to remind themselves, and you, that life, even in strict devotion, cannot be entirely tamed. Every corridor you pass, every door you glance into, reinforces a paradox. Order and chaos coexist in delicate balance. The stone walls feel both protective and restrictive, and you understand that monks didn't simply follow rules because they were told to. They adapted, invented subtle workarounds, and discovered small joys within austere confines. Perhaps that's why some would secretly hum tunes under their breath, or swap mischievous glances during silent meals. You catch a whiff of something unexpected, maybe a faint scent of lavender, maybe a lingering note of roasted chestnuts from a long-ago feast, and it reminds you that even here, the world outside occasionally leaks in. As you pause to let your eyes wander across the worn wooden benches and carved pews, it dawns on you that tonight's journey is as much about observation as participation. You feel the weight of centuries pressing on every surface, yet there's a rhythm, a pulse, a slow breathing of life that has persisted despite, or perhaps because of, the strictest rules. And in that quiet, you begin to sense the essential strangeness of it all. Monks shaping their lives around rituals so precise that even minor infractions were significant, yet finding ways to preserve joy, humor, and humanity within them. So, as you stand in this shadowed hall, listening to distant footsteps and the faint rustle of robes, you start to realize that medieval monastic life was not only a spiritual exercise but a profound experiment in human adaptability. The rules may seem absurd to you, the modern outsider, but they were carefully constructed to channel energy, focus attention, and cultivate a form of inner stillness. And tonight, walking among these echoes, you begin to appreciate that even the strangest rules can reveal something deeply human, something enduring, and maybe even comforting. You step out into the cloistered courtyard as the first hint of dawn softens the stone arches, and you notice the dew glinting on the mossy roofs and cobblestones like tiny, hesitant stars. The air is cool and damp, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and the lingering smoke from the kitchen hearth. You probably won't survive if you imagine trying to move freely here. Every step seems laden with invisible expectation, and the monk's world is so meticulously structured that even the birds seem to chirp in measured intervals. But that's exactly the point of tonight's journey, to see the rhythm, the oddities, and the rules that have guided lives for centuries. So, take a deep breath, maybe stretch your shoulders, and get ready to follow along as the monks begin their morning routine, one ritual at a time. You notice immediately that silence isn't simply a lack of sound here, it's a carefully maintained atmosphere, punctuated only by small, necessary noises. A bucket scrapes gently across the stone floor, carrying water from the well. A novice coughs softly, as though apologizing for the interruption. And you trudge carefully, trying to match your own pace to this subtle cadence, marveling at how every motion, no matter how mundane, carries a quiet weight. Historians still argue whether the strictures on speech truly elevated spiritual life or simply enforced psychological control, but as you watch, it feels like both at once. The first task of the day is the matins bell, calling everyone to the chapel for prayer. You feel the cold stone beneath your feet as you follow the procession of robed monks, their hoods drawn, hands clasped, faces calm but sharply attentive. The chant begins, low and resonant, vibrating through your chest and fingering at the edges of your consciousness, making you suddenly aware of your own heartbeat. The rules dictate posture, tone, and even the placement of your eyes, and you catch yourself mimicking the slight bow of a head or the precise alignment of hands. It's strange, almost theatrical, but you start to understand the meticulous design behind it, a controlled environment meant to foster focus, humility, and communal awareness. After matins, the monks move to their daily labor, and you trail quietly behind. Some sweep the stone floors with bundles of straw tied together, the soft swish of bristles marking a hypnotic rhythm. Others tend the garden, moving gingerly around delicate herbs like lavender and rosemary, each gesture deliberate, almost reverent. You notice the improvisation in the smallest actions. A novice finds a clever way to tie a bundle of straw. A monk uses a simple wooden clamp to secure a loose board. These small innovations don't break the rules, they enhance them, showing that even within rigid structures, human ingenuity finds its place. Breakfast is modest but ritualized. You observe the monks washing their hands, the water poured from a shared vessel, each movement precise and almost meditative. Bread, cheese, and a small cup of thin ale are consumed with silent gratitude, the act of eating treated as a sacred exercise. You glance around and see the subtle hierarchy. Older monks quietly guide younger novices, offering silent correction when posture or hand position is slightly off. And yet, despite the strictness, there's a warmth here, a sense of shared experience that is almost familial, grounded in repetition and attentiveness. Historians still argue whether these communal rituals created true bonds or merely reinforced obedience, but you notice the faint smiles that appear when a small mishap occurs, and it suggests both. You wander through the scriptorium afterward, eyes tracing the meticulous lettering and marginalia on illuminated manuscripts. The quills scratch delicately, ink wells glinting in the filtered sunlight, and you marvel at the patience required for each stroke. One monk adds tiny, whimsical drawings in the margins, a fox peeking out, a tiny dragon curling around a letter, reminding you that even in the strictest environment, play and creativity can slip through the cracks. You feel a shiver of recognition. Rules do not entirely suppress imagination. They channel it into specific, often beautiful forms. Later, you watch the novices practice their reading aloud, carefully enunciating each word while maintaining perfect posture. The chanting resonates with the architectural acoustics of the stone halls, bouncing softly and creating layers of sound that almost seem to envelop you. You catch yourself leaning in, entranced, thinking about how even a simple task like reciting psalms becomes a test of endurance, focus, and subtle performance. And when a mistake is made, the correction is gentle yet pointed, a blend of discipline and instruction that seems almost nurturing despite its rigidity. As the morning drifts into midday, you notice the monks' meals and chores are punctuated with small acts of devotion, lighting candles, wiping tables, tending animals. Even the smallest movement has significance, a micro-ritual reinforcing the larger framework of their lives. The rules aren't just arbitrary, they create a lattice that structures time, attention, and even emotion. You feel the strange comfort in this, imagining how a day here must feel both infinite and constrained, a careful balancing act between freedom and submission. By mid-afternoon, the scriptorium is quiet again, and you find yourself wandering along the cloister, observing the interplay of sunlight and shadow on carved stone, the faint scent of ink and herb mixing in the air. You pause to note a monk quietly humming a tune while folding laundry, or another carefully arranging books on a shelf. These small deviations, almost invisible, hint at a human presence that cannot be entirely contained by rules. You begin to sense the paradox. Strict discipline encourages not only obedience but a subtle, creative survival of personality. You finish the day with vespers, the evening prayers, and notice how the rhythm of sound and silence has shifted from morning's high alert to a calmer, almost reflective cadence. Candles flicker more freely now, shadows stretch longer, and the air feels softer, weighted with the accumulated labor and devotion of the day. You realize that while the rules are many, the monks' lives are also deeply human, threaded with subtle joys, mischief, and creativity hidden beneath layers of expectation. Historians still argue whether these structures were spiritually necessary or socially controlling, but standing here, you understand that it doesn't really matter. The monks made it work, and their world is both alien and comforting in its strange precision. You trudge down the narrow cloister path, your feet crunching on gravel, and notice how the monastery gardens have been meticulously ordered, each herb, flower, and vegetable planted with deliberate symmetry. The lavender sways gently in the breeze, rosemary needles glint in the light, and small marigolds line the edges like golden punctuation. You probably won't survive imagining how precise every step of planting must have been, because in this world, nothing is random, not even a sprig of thyme. And yet, as you watch the novices bend and kneel, carefully tending each plant, you notice the subtle gestures that hint at personality. a playful tug on a vine, a fleeting smile exchanged between two hands working side by side. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And maybe drop a comment with your location and local time. It's strangely comforting to think someone else, somewhere, is following along. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The garden is not just a source of food or medicine, it's a living classroom for patience, observation, and ritualized care. You crouch beside a wooden trough filled with fresh water and see how the novices wash their hands and tools before tending the plants, the water glinting like liquid silver in the morning sun. A small spill on the stones is met with immediate correction, not chastisement, but a silent lesson. Every detail matters. Historians still argue whether such minute care in monastic gardens truly improved health or was simply an exercise in obedience. Yet standing here, it feels both practical and spiritual. As you wander past the herb beds, you see the preparation for the next stage of the day, copying manuscripts. You step into the scriptorium and notice how light falls evenly across the wooden desks, illuminating inkpots, quills, and small scraps of parchment. Each monk works in near silence, yet the room hums with energy. The soft scratch of quills, the faint shifting of paper, the occasional whisper when a page is passed. You trudge along the aisle, trying not to disrupt the flow, and realize how this environment trains the body as much as the mind. Posture, breath, and patience are all carefully regulated. Even the simplest slip, a blot of ink, carries significance, a minor disruption in a world where order governs nearly everything. You lean closer to observe one monk adding tiny marginalia to a page. A rabbit peeks from behind a letter, a whimsical flourish in a dense sea of script. The details are so precise that it's almost hypnotic, a combination of discipline and creativity that feels like a secret rebellion allowed by the rigid rules. You notice that even mistakes are embraced subtly. A blot becomes a playful doodle, a smudge morphs into a decorative flourish. The monk's environment is strict, yes, but it's also surprisingly forgiving for small bursts of imagination. Midday arrives with a faint toll of the bells, signaling the next communal activity, the kitchen. You follow the sound of chopping and stirring, inhaling the mixture of baked bread, herbs, and simmering broth. Here, the rules take a practical turn. Every motion in the kitchen is choreographed for efficiency and hygiene. You trudge past a novice carrying a wooden bowl of water, watching them wash their hands, then stir a pot of pottage. The coordination is almost dance-like, the rhythm guided by experience and strict adherence to ritual. Historians still argue whether these routines limited the spread of disease or simply reinforced hierarchy, but you can't help noticing the calm efficiency that pervades the space. You pause near the fireplace, watching a cook carefully adjust a small brazier under a cauldron to maintain even heat. Tiny sparks dance briefly in the air, casting flecks of gold across the stone floor. The scent of rosemary and thyme mingles with the bread, a subtle reminder of the garden's earlier influence. You can almost feel the invisible network of rules threading through the kitchen. How food is handled, who speaks when, and even the angle at which a ladle is held. It's mesmerizing, like observing a living, breathing algorithm in motion. Later, you observe the monks in the infirmary, a quiet sanctuary of small ministrations and careful attentions. Bandages are folded with care, poultices applied with gentle precision, and water is used sparingly for cleaning wounds. You notice the rhythm in every motion, a steady hand, a soft murmur of guidance, a nod of reassurance. The air smells faintly of vinegar, herbs, and the faint human presence of labor, and you realize that even in matters of sickness, the rules serve to protect and guide, creating a calm order against the chaos of disease. In the afternoon, you follow a monk who tends the library. The scent of aged parchment mingles with beeswax from candle stubs, and you see the meticulous sorting and handling of fragile texts. Even the smallest book is treated with reverence, as though touching it incorrectly might disturb not just the words but the accumulated wisdom of centuries. You trace the outlines of gold leaf illuminations, noticing the care in each stroke and the deliberate layering of color. It's a silent, visual testament to how rules shaped not only action but the aesthetic sense of these communities. You wander again into the cloister, where the open air and sunlight contrast with the enclosed scriptorium. Here, novices walk in measured steps, their hoods drawn, hands folded, eyes lowered. You notice the subtle hierarchy in movement. Older monks guide the younger ones, gestures small but precise. Even in leisure or casual motion, the rules persist, embedding discipline into every moment of life. And you can't help imagining how exhausting yet comforting such constant structure must have felt, a duality that defines so much of monastic life. By late afternoon, the communal work shifts to maintenance, sweeping, repairing, and organizing. You watch as wooden tools are aligned, straw bundles carried, floors scrubbed with rhythmic diligence. The effort is exhausting but oddly serene, a physical manifestation of the monk's devotion. Even laughter is measured, quick and soft, as if spontaneous joy itself is policed by decorum. Historians still argue whether these rigid routines fostered creativity or stifled it, but you note the small smiles and playful nods that slip through, revealing humanity thriving within constraint. The evening approaches with vespers drawing near. Candles flicker as shadows stretch along stone walls, and the chants begin again, softer now, more reflective. You trudge beside the monks, noticing how each posture, each movement, each inhalation and exhalation is subtly regulated to produce a harmonious flow. There is an artistry in obedience, a kind of beauty in repetition. You can almost feel the centuries of habit layering over the present, a quiet testament to discipline and devotion. Finally, night deepens, and you find yourself wandering the cloister alone. The moon casts silver lines across the stone, illuminating the subtle flourishes of carved capitals and delicate tracery. You pause to hear the distant hum of an owl, the whisper of wind through the garden, and realize that the day's rules, rituals, and innovations have not only structured the monks' lives but have created a space where beauty, care, and discipline coexist. Even the strictest rule now seems like a gentle, guiding hand rather than a constraint. You trudge toward the refectory, where the scent of simple food greets you, a mix of barley porridge, dried herbs, and the faint tang of vinegar. The long wooden tables are lined with monks sitting shoulder to shoulder, each one moving with quiet precision as they eat in silence. You notice the strict choreography. Hands are washed in a small basin before sitting, bread is broken in a particular order, and no word is spoken until the abbot gives the subtle nod. Even chewing seems ritualized, a deliberate, measured act. Historians still argue whether such rigid mealtime rules improved digestion or simply reinforced social hierarchy, but there's no denying the calming, almost hypnotic effect of the repetition. As you watch, a novice spills a cup of thin ale. No loud clamor, only a soft intake of breath and a quick gesture to blot the puddle with a cloth. You can't help but smirk at the understated drama. In this world, even small accidents are lessons in self-control and attention. Meanwhile, the monks' garments, the dull indigo tunics, simple woolen cloaks, linen caps, flutter subtly with each movement, revealing how their daily attire reinforces modesty and utility. The light from high windows casts faint lines on the stone floors, emphasizing the symmetry of the room and the uniformity of the occupants' behavior. Between bites, you catch glimpses of tiny, almost hidden acts of individuality. A monk with a crooked stitch in his robe, a flicker of curiosity in a young novice's eye, a small doodle etched into the rim of a plate. It's as if the monastery allows whispers of personality within the boundaries of discipline. You trudge slowly down the aisle, inhaling the mingled scents of the day, smoke from the hearth, herbs from the garden, and the subtle, warm odor of human presence. And you realize that even in silence, there's a symphony of life happening around you. Later, you wander toward the cloister fountain, a place both practical and symbolic. The water glints under the soft afternoon light, and you see novices carefully washing their hands, each movement deliberate and slow. A small drop escapes a ladle and is immediately corrected, a reminder that in this environment, precision matters as much as prayer. Historians still argue whether such obsessive attention to cleanliness truly protected against disease or was more about reinforcing control, yet standing here, it feels like both. The ritual transforms an ordinary act into a meditation, a way of aligning body, mind, and spirit with the rhythm of monastic life. You linger to watch the interplay of utility and ritual. Water poured over hands, a small scrub of a stone basin, a whispered blessing before the bucket is returned. Every action, while functional, carries an aesthetic grace, a choreography that converts necessity into mindfulness. You notice the faint gleam of water droplets on fingers and the soft ripple of the fountain's surface, almost hypnotic in its repetition. In this microcosm of life, even hygiene becomes an art, a dance of careful attention and devotion, subtly echoing the larger order that governs every corner of the monastery. The quiet extends into the library, where you notice a monk carefully cataloging a scroll. The air is thick with the scent of parchment and beeswax, the faint tang of ink, and a whisper of the human touch that has handled these materials for centuries. You observe the gentle, deliberate care, unrolling a scroll, smoothing a crease, noting a marginal correction. Each movement is slow, measured, and meaningful, demonstrating the monastery's philosophy that every gesture can be an expression of devotion, even outside prayer. Moving back through the gardens, you see the novices drawing water from the well. You trudge beside them, noticing how carefully each bucket is lifted, each rope handled, each drop of water cherished. The act is mundane, yet it feels ceremonious, almost sacred. Herbs grown nearby provide subtle fragrance, masking the faint tang of earth and stone. Historians still argue whether such mindfulness in mundane tasks served primarily practical or spiritual purposes, but in this moment, it feels like both, a perfect harmony of necessity and ritual. Later, you pass the infirmary, where a monk applies poultices to minor wounds. The scent of vinegar and herbs mingles with the faint human aroma of labor and care. Each motion, wrapping, pressing, smoothing, is precise, deliberate, and repeated with a patience that borders on reverence. You trudge along, feeling the rhythm, noticing how even acts of healing are governed by subtle rules that protect, teach, and maintain harmony within the community. By twilight, the sound of chanting drifts from the main chapel. You follow the echoing voices, each one melding with the others in a gentle, melodic pattern. The monks' movements are synchronized, bodies swaying with quiet purpose. You can't help but be drawn into the rhythm, sensing the centuries of habit and discipline woven into each gesture. Even the smallest novice, a shadow against the candlelight, participates with reverent care, a testament to how deeply these rules have been internalized. Finally, you trudge to the outer cloister, where shadows stretch long and the air cools. The gardens are hushed, and the scent of herbs is tinged with evening dew. A gentle wind carries the subtle chorus of distant birds and the faint, steady murmur of the fountain. You pause to breathe it in, reflecting on the seamless integration of discipline, ritual, and life. The monastery, with all its peculiar rules, has become a world in which every action, from writing to washing to walking, contains purpose, order, and a quiet elegance. You trudge quietly to the scriptorium, a room suffused with the soft glow of candlelight that dances over stacks of parchment and half-finished manuscripts. The air is thick with the scent of ink, beeswax, and old vellum, a perfume that smells of centuries and concentration. You notice the monks seated at narrow desks, quills in hand, each line of script painstakingly formed, each stroke deliberate. Their movements are slow but precise, almost ritualistic, as though the act of writing itself is a prayer. Historians still argue whether the rigid copying standards truly preserved texts better or merely enforced conformity, but you can't deny the meditative beauty of it. One monk pauses to dip his quill in ink, eyes narrowing as he concentrates. You see the faint tremor in his hand, a human imperfection against the strict geometry of the letters, and it makes you smile. Nearby, a novice struggles with a particularly tricky Latin passage, mumbling under his breath, and you can almost hear the rhythm of centuries-old frustration and triumph echoing in the air. Occasionally, a teacher passes by, gently correcting posture or script, a soft tap of a finger on the parchment, guiding without scolding. Even small motions, straightening a sheet, adjusting a cloak, carry the weight of habit and centuries of monastic discipline. The scriptorium is more than a workshop, it is a sensory universe of texture and sound. You notice the faint scratch of quill on parchment, the subtle rustle of robes, the occasional creak of wooden benches. Candles flicker and the shadows of the monks stretch long across the room, intersecting with gilded initials and marginalia. In one corner, a tiny illustration is forming, a whimsical marginal devil peeking from behind a vine, a secret indulgence within the austere environment. You can almost hear a whisper of amusement among the otherwise silent occupants, a tiny rebellion tucked into the folds of strict routine. You lean closer to observe the process of illumination, where gold leaf is carefully applied to tiny floral patterns along the page margins. The reflective glint of shell gold catches the candlelight, creating a miniature sun in the dim room. You realize that every stroke is not merely decorative but a demonstration of patience, reverence, and skill, an intertwining of artistry and devotion. The colors, indigo, russet, saffron, and teal, appear muted under the soft candlelight, yet vibrant in their meticulous arrangement. Each page becomes a microcosm of the monastery's values: order, beauty, and mindfulness. Meanwhile, the monks' schedules remain relentless. One pauses to wash his hands in a small basin, the movements slow and deliberate, almost ritualistic, before returning to his task. Others silently prepare pigments, grinding lapis lazuli into a fine powder or mixing ochres with egg tempera. You trudge past, inhaling the mixture of scents, powdered stone, oil, egg yolk, and the faint trace of human effort. There's a quiet poetry in it, a choreography of labor that mirrors the rhythm of their prayers and daily routines. You notice the interplay of secrecy and discipline. Some monks hide tiny doodles or coded notes within their work, private echoes of personality, a gentle reminder that even in this rigid life, humanity finds a way to peek through. A particularly small figure of a dragon winds its way around the border of a manuscript, playful yet subtle, almost invisible unless you know where to look. Historians still argue whether such embellishments were mere entertainment or served a deeper mnemonic or instructional purpose, but in this moment, they feel like tiny bursts of life in an otherwise ordered universe. As the evening deepens, a soft silence settles over the room, broken only by the scratching of quills and the occasional sigh. The monks work tirelessly, creating legacies meant to survive beyond their lifetimes, and you can't help but marvel at the dedication. Even minor mistakes are corrected meticulously, a blot erased, a letter reformed, a line retraced. The precision feels almost sacred, as though each movement reinforces a bond between the scribe, the divine, and the text itself. Outside the scriptorium window, the garden is bathed in the silver glow of twilight. You notice the rhythmic swaying of herbs in the evening breeze and the faint sound of water from the cloister fountain. The sensory world within the scriptorium seems to echo the natural rhythms without, the measured, deliberate movements of the monks reflecting the cycles of day and night, growth and decay. Every inked line, every gilded flourish is a small act of devotion, a meditation on time and mortality, performed in silence and light. A novice brings a new batch of parchment to the front desk, the pages crisp and white, a blank canvas for the discipline and creativity about to unfold. You observe the subtle hierarchy at play. Older monks guiding, novices learning, everyone participating in the quiet orchestra of labor. Even the smallest gestures, laying out a quill, adjusting a candle, carry meaning, demonstrating respect for the materials, the space, and the centuries-old tradition. You linger by a table where a particularly intricate illumination is emerging, noting the interplay of color, line, and gold. The delicate brown ink outlines define shapes that could easily have been washed away in haste, yet here they are, exact and enduring. Each stroke seems to hum with purpose, an almost imperceptible heartbeat of discipline and patience. It's mesmerizing. You can't help but notice the tiny, almost hidden imperfections that make the work human. A smudge, a slightly uneven line, a brushstroke that strays just enough to remind you of the person behind it. At the far end, a small incense burner glows softly, sending a faint trail of smoke into the air. It mingles with a sense of ink, parchment, and wax, creating an atmosphere that is at once serene and concentrated. You notice the monks occasionally pause, inhaling the aroma, a small moment of sensory reprieve before returning to the rhythm of their work. Even in this environment of extreme order, subtle pleasures are acknowledged, carefully woven into the day. You observe one monk adjusting his posture, stretching his fingers after hours of quill work. The motion is deliberate, almost ceremonial, a reminder that even in sedentary labor, the body must be attended to. Nearby, another monk dips a brush in pigment, adding a flourish to a decorative border with precision and patience. The room feels alive, not through noise, but through meticulous, purposeful movement. Toward the end of your observation, the evening light has softened completely, leaving only the flicker of candle flames casting long shadows across the desks. You notice how the symmetry of the room, the uniformity of garments, and the careful placement of materials create a sense of visual order, reinforcing the mental discipline cultivated within these walls. Even the smallest misalignment seems almost sacrilegious, a subtle tension in the otherwise harmonious environment. Finally, you step back to absorb the scene as a whole. The scriptorium is a world within a world, a place where discipline, creativity, devotion, and subtle human expression intertwine. Each quill stroke, each pigment ground, each gold leaf applied carries significance, both practical and symbolic. It's a microcosm of monastic life, where the extraordinary is revealed in the smallest details, and where the act of writing becomes an enduring meditation on order, patience, and devotion. You exit the scriptorium and find yourself in the cloister, a narrow stone corridor lined with arches that frame the fading light of late afternoon. The air is cooler here, carrying the scent of damp stone, moss, and the faint fragrance of herbs from the adjacent garden. Your footsteps echo softly against the worn flagstones, a metronome marking the rhythm of monastic life. Monks pass silently, heads bowed, hands folded, robes swishing with a measured grace. Historians still argue whether such cloisters were designed solely for meditation, or if their architecture also subtly reinforced social hierarchy, but in this moment, you sense the quiet authority of structure. You pause to watch a monk tending to a small herb bed. His hands move with deliberate care, patting soil around young rosemary shoots, plucking a single sprig of lavender, and brushing away fallen leaves. Every gesture seems ritualized, as though he's not just gardening but performing an act of devotion. Nearby, another monk trims a miniature rose bush, petals catching the dying light in shades of russet and deep crimson. You notice the meticulous attention to detail. Even in the garden, the monastery demands precision. The cloister walls are covered in faint carvings, tiny inscriptions left by monks over decades. You lean closer, tracing a name here, a date there, realizing that even idle hands created their own quiet record of life. A faint breeze stirs the air, carrying with it a whiff of damp straw from the barnyard beyond the garden wall. Children's laughter drifts faintly, a reminder that beyond the cloister's quiet, the village continues its everyday rhythm. A novice passes carrying a small clay pitcher of water, careful not to spill a single drop. He approaches a stone basin and kneels, washing his hands in the cool liquid with slow, deliberate motions. The water glints in the afternoon light, tiny prisms dancing across the surface. You notice how the act of washing, even so simple, becomes imbued with care and ritual, an almost sacred acknowledgement of life and cleanliness in a world still haunted by disease. As you move deeper into the cloister, you spot a monk reading aloud from a small breviary, voice soft but resonant. The words carry, bouncing lightly off stone arches, blending with the muted rustle of robes and the occasional sigh of effort. Even in this silent corridor, the rhythm of spoken devotion intertwines with the physicality of labor and movement. You can almost see the echo of centuries in this blend of voice and action, a living testament to the discipline cultivated here. The air is punctuated by occasional animal sounds, a cat weaving silently between columns, a dog barking faintly in the distance. These minor intrusions highlight the contrast between the cloister's deliberate calm and the unpredictable natural world outside. You notice how the monks move around these interruptions, accommodating them without breaking their focus, a subtle lesson in balance and patience. Near the corner of the cloister, a small wooden bench holds a collection of simple tools: pruning shears, a trowel, a pair of scissors. You see a monk pause, selecting one carefully, and returning to a task with almost theatrical precision. The act of choosing, handling, and using each tool is imbued with intent, transforming simple labor into a meditation. Historians still argue whether such attention to minutiae was primarily spiritual or a practical way to instill discipline, but the effect is undeniably hypnotic. A breeze lifts the hem of a monk's robe as he walks past, revealing plain sandals and the careful layering of garments meant for warmth and modesty. You notice the contrast between these practical considerations and the almost theatrical care given to smaller details, like tying a cord just so or folding a sleeve precisely. Even in their most utilitarian attire, the monks' actions are suffused with purpose and subtle artistry. The cloister curves toward the refectory, and you glimpse a small group of monks quietly carrying bread and cheese for the evening meal. Their movements are deliberate, each step measured as they balance wooden trays and clay bowls. The act of transporting food seems simple but carries an unspoken reverence for sustenance, a reflection of monastic values that intertwine the physical and spiritual. You notice inscriptions etched into the stone columns, small prayers, reminders, and even a few doodles, playful deviations from strict decorum. These tiny marks speak to the human need for expression, even within the confines of rigid discipline. One small etching, a dragon curling around a floral vine, catches your eye. It's subtle, almost hidden, yet it adds warmth to the austere surroundings. Nearby, a monk leans over a small fountain, murmuring a quiet blessing as he dips his hands. The water flows with soft, measured consistency, and you can't help but notice the ceremonial weight given to such a mundane act. Even here, hygiene becomes an intersection of care, spirituality, and social rhythm. The scent of wet stone and herbs mingles subtly, a reminder of the sensory complexity within simplicity. The sun continues its descent, bathing the cloister in a soft amber glow. Shadows stretch along the columns, elongating the monks' movements into elegant silhouettes. You feel a quiet awe at the choreography of life within these walls. Work, prayer, movement, all flowing seamlessly together. Even the mundane, the sweeping of the floor, the watering of herbs, becomes a testament to order, patience, and reverence. You pause to observe a novice practicing calligraphy on a small board, ink barely dry. The strokes are careful, intentional, each one a miniature act of devotion, a rehearsal in focus and discipline. Nearby, a more experienced monk observes silently, offering occasional corrections with subtle gestures rather than words. There is a tactile intimacy in this guidance, a transfer of knowledge that feels both gentle and weighty. At the far end of the cloister, a small altar holds a candle, flickering in rhythm with the ambient light. You notice how the illumination casts long, soft shadows that mingle with the arches, benches, and stone carvings. The interplay of light and shadow mirrors the interplay of discipline and subtle creativity present in every corner of monastic life. As twilight deepens, the cloister grows quieter, the sounds of labor and conversation fading into a hushed reverence. You linger, taking in the measured movement, the meticulous care, and the faint, almost imperceptible expressions of personality woven into the daily routine. Even in silence, the monks communicate their values and devotion through gestures, posture, and the rhythm of their steps. Finally, you take one last look down the length of the cloister. The arches frame the fading light, the rows of monks still moving with purpose, and the tiny marks of individuality scattered throughout the stonework. It's a world where order and ritual reign supreme, yet subtle human expression persists, quiet and resilient, a testament to centuries of disciplined life. You follow the narrow corridor from the cloister toward the refectory, the air thick with the scent of baking bread and simmering pottage. The last rays of sunlight filter through high windows, casting elongated rectangles of amber light across the cold stone floor. Your footsteps are muffled against the worn flagstones, and you notice how the acoustics of the corridor magnify the soft scrape of a monk's sandals, turning ordinary movement into something almost musical. Historians still argue whether such architectural choices were intended primarily for meditation, acoustics, or simply the practical use of stone, but the effect on you is undeniable. Even silence here has a texture. You pause to watch a novice carry a wooden tray stacked with small loaves of bread, carefully balancing it as he approaches a long refectory table. The bread smells yeasty and sweet, a humble luxury in a life dominated by ritual and restraint. Another monk adjusts the placement of a small clay bowl, tilting it so the stew within catches the light. The act is subtle, almost imperceptible, but there is a careful choreography to everything: balance, movement, and attention to detail. At the center of the refectory, a larger table holds a communal pitcher of water and a set of clay cups. You see a monk pour slowly, deliberately, letting each cup catch the sunlight as the water splashes softly. The motion is hypnotic, a quiet reminder of how even the most mundane acts are elevated in this world. You lean closer and notice that each monk pauses for a brief blessing before drinking, a tiny ritual acknowledging life and sustenance. Across the room, a pair of monks lean toward one another, whispering softly while maintaining impeccable posture. Their heads tilt, lips barely moving, hands folded neatly atop the table. You detect a slight glimmer of humor in their eyes, humanity finding space within discipline. Nearby, A child novice giggles softly at a minor misstep, quickly covered with a hand pressed over his mouth. The subtle interplay between levity and order reminds you that even in strict hierarchies, life finds cracks for joy and expression. You shift your gaze to the walls, adorned with simple tapestries depicting saints and biblical scenes. The images are rich with color: deep indigo, muted russet, and flecks of gold leaf highlighting halos and ornamental details. These visual markers reinforce the spiritual atmosphere, but you notice the occasional whimsical addition, a tiny animal or a minor saint's accessory, that seems almost playful, a subtle signature from the artisan. A monk approaches the table with a small wooden knife, slicing a loaf for the meal. Each cut is precise, deliberate, the rhythm almost meditative. You notice how the simple act of dividing food becomes a study in patience and attention. The smell of freshly baked bread mingles with the earthy aroma of the stone floor and the faint herbal notes drifting from the garden, a sensory layering that feels deliberate and comforting. A novice carries a steaming pot of pottage, moving carefully so as not to spill a single drop. You watch the liquid shimmer under the fading light, the herbs floating lazily on top. Even these modest ingredients are treated with care, each spoonful prepared and served with ritual precision. You catch a brief exchange between monks, a wordless acknowledgement of shared effort, a small recognition that sustenance is both practical and sacred. The refectory air is punctuated by the occasional clink of clay cups or wooden trays. You notice how even sound is moderated: no laughter is loud, no movement abrupt. Everything is measured, as if the room itself enforces decorum. Historians still argue whether this was a conscious attempt at discipline or simply a byproduct of the materials and architecture, but the result is a serene, almost hypnotic rhythm that settles around you. You watch a monk dip a piece of bread into the stew, careful to avoid drips. The gesture, though simple, is executed with elegance. Each monk, from the youngest novice to the elder, moves with this practiced precision, as though the act of eating itself has become a meditation on balance, attention, and mindfulness. The combination of smell, texture, and ritualized movement creates an immersive, almost sacred atmosphere. Nearby, a novice wipes the edge of his bowl with a cloth, folding it neatly afterward. This small act is as meaningful as the meal itself, a demonstration of order and respect. You notice that each movement, no matter how minor, is observed and, occasionally, silently corrected by the senior monks. Even gestures of cleanliness are part of the educational rhythm, a lesson passed down silently, day after day. At one end of the table, a monk reads aloud from a small book of prayers while others listen, eyes lowered but attentive. The voice is soft but carries, intertwining with the ambient sounds of the refectory. The cadence of the reading seems to shape the room, setting a tempo that governs both motion and thought, an audible companion to the visual and tactile rituals. You spot a small corner where leftover herbs and crumbs are swept carefully into a wicker basket. This attention to waste, to order, is part of the monastic ethic. Nothing is trivial, everything is an opportunity for mindfulness. Even the mundane act of tidying becomes a lesson in discipline, a subtle moral exercise embedded in daily life. The sunlight fades completely, leaving only the soft flicker of candles along the walls. Shadows stretch and merge, creating a quiet, golden cocoon around the table. You feel the weight of hours compressed into each gesture: pouring, cutting, blessing, stirring. Every act, no matter how small, is imbued with intention, a continuous thread connecting labor, devotion, and survival. You notice the minor rituals interspersed with a meal: a nod of thanks when food is passed, a silent glance between companions, the gentle fold of hands over the chest. These are subtle markers of community, reminders that even in a life of isolation and discipline, human connection persists. Finally, the meal winds down. Bowls and trays are carefully gathered, washed, and returned to their places. The room exudes a quiet satisfaction, a blend of fullness, order, and ritualistic completion. You take a deep breath, inhaling the combined scents of herbs, bread, and warm stone, feeling a gentle contentment. Even in simplicity, there is richness, a testament to centuries of practice, care, and deliberate living. You step out of the refectory into the courtyard, where the evening air carries the coolness of approaching night and the faint aroma of damp earth. The cobblestones glisten from earlier rain, and the low hum of cicadas mingles with the distant crowing of a rooster settling in for the night. Your feet, clad in simple leather sandals, make muted impressions on the worn stone, each step a reminder that the monastic world continues even beyond the walls. Historians still argue whether courtyards were designed purely for practical movement or to cultivate moments of reflection, but to you, this one feels like both. A novice scrubs a wooden bucket, the motions precise, almost ritualistic. Soap bubbles cling to the rough wood, catching the last rays of sunlight in tiny rainbows. Water is a precious commodity here. The monks use it sparingly, carefully, and even the smallest splashes are a cause for mindfulness. You notice the rhythmic back and forth of the scrub brush, a quiet meditation punctuated by the occasional whisper of a supervising elder. The practice might seem trivial, yet it embodies centuries of disciplined observation and practical necessity. Along the edge of the courtyard, a small herb garden thrives. Rosemary, lavender, and mint are carefully tended in neat rows. A monk crouches to pinch off dead leaves, scattering them into a wicker basket. You catch a hint of the scent as you pass. The aroma mingles with the stone-cold evening air, creating a sensory bridge between labor and ritual. Herbs are not merely decorative here. They serve practical purposes: medicinal remedies, flavoring meals, even pest deterrents. There's a kind of poetry in seeing something so fragrant and functional coexisting in harmony. Nearby, another monk carries a clay jug to the well. You watch him dip it with careful precision, muttering a silent prayer under his breath before lifting the water. The weight of the liquid, the cool touch against his hands, and the quiet acknowledgement of scarcity all blend into a moment that feels almost sacred. Every drop is measured, none is wasted. In this way, you realize that survival, ritual, and spirituality are intricately intertwined. At the far end of the courtyard, a pair of novices whisper to each other while folding a linen cloth over a wooden railing. Their laughter is muffled, barely escaping into the courtyard's cool shadows, yet it punctuates the otherwise measured atmosphere with life. Even here, within the rigid boundaries of monastic rules, small human moments flourish. You note how secrecy, discretion, and play intertwine, echoing centuries-old patterns that likely puzzled the stricter monks. The stone fountain at the center gurgles softly, water cascading over carved faces of angels. You linger, watching how the monk's reflection in the rippling water distorts and shifts with each movement. There's a subtle, almost hypnotic rhythm, dipping, lifting, stepping back, kneeling briefly in contemplation. These gestures are as much about inner reflection as outer cleanliness. You can almost feel centuries of repeated motion embedding themselves into the stones, each drop of water carrying a story of devotion and discipline. A senior monk approaches a small brazier, adjusting the flame to warm a tub for evening ablutions. Straw and herbs line the inside, creating a makeshift bath that balances efficiency with care. You notice the precise layering of materials, a technique that seems mundane yet is refined through decades of practice. Even in scarcity, there is attention to comfort and ritual. the act of washing is transformed into a microcosm of monastic order. Across the courtyard, a novice kneels to sweep fallen leaves into a clay pot, the motion repetitive yet meditative. Dust swirls gently with each sweep, mingling with the earthy scents of the courtyard. These small tasks, though silent and often unnoticed, reinforce the rhythm of life here, a continuous cycle of labor, reflection, and preparation for the day's spiritual duties. Historians still argue whether such chores were primarily spiritual exercises or practical necessities, but in your observation, they are undeniably both. In a shaded corner, you glimpse a monk quietly sharpening a wooden spoon. The subtle scrape of wood against stone punctuates the evening hush. Each tool, each implement, is meticulously cared for, demonstrating the intertwining of utility and mindfulness. Even the simplest objects are treated with reverence, a philosophy that permeates the monastic way of life. A faint bell tolls from the distant church tower, signaling the approach of evening prayers. Monks pause mid-task, glancing toward the sound with the practiced calm of habituated obedience. The bell's resonance mixes with the ambient courtyard sounds, gurgling water, soft rustle of leaves, muted footsteps, to create a layered symphony of twilight labor. You sense that time here is both measured and elastic, dictated by rhythm more than clock. A solitary candle flickers in a nearby alcove where a monk sits cross-legged, meditating silently. Its tiny flame dances across his features, illuminating a serene, almost ethereal expression. You notice the contrast between the intensity of focus and the gentle chaos of the courtyard around him. It's a reminder that stillness and motion coexist here seamlessly, a balance that governs daily life. A young novice tests the water in the tub, dipping a finger and flinching at the warmth before signaling readiness to the senior monk. The act, simple on its surface, is layered with responsibility and ritual. You observe the unspoken codes: who handles water, who observes, and the care taken to honor scarcity while maintaining comfort. Even the smallest detail becomes a lesson in discipline. Near the edge of the courtyard, herbs from the garden are sprinkled into the steaming bath, releasing a gentle fragrance. You inhale, letting the scent mingle with the evening air, and notice how smell is used to reinforce the sacredness of routine. Each addition, rosemary, lavender, mint, is deliberate, a sensory signal that hygiene, ritual, and care are inseparable. A monk quietly fans the steam rising from the tub, maintaining a comfortable environment for washing. The movement is subtle, barely perceptible, yet essential to the effectiveness of the ritual. You note the precision in every action: heating water, adding herbs, arranging straw, all orchestrated in a rhythm that maximizes efficiency while honoring spiritual principles. Finally, as twilight deepens into night, the courtyard empties save for a few stragglers finishing chores. The ambient sounds soften, leaving only the whisper of leaves, distant fountain, and the occasional shuffle of sandals. You breathe deeply, absorbing the layered aromas of wet stone, herbs, and warm wood, realizing that in this carefully managed space, even a mundane evening carries profound significance. The interplay of labor, ritual, and sensory attention creates a subtle but powerful sense of order and peace. You follow the last of the courtyard's light into the narrow corridor that leads toward the monk's sleeping quarters, the stone floor cool beneath your bare feet. Shadows stretch long along the walls, flickering in the glow of wall-mounted candles, their flames quivering as if hesitant to illuminate the quiet corridors. The air carries a mix of dampness from the evening and the faint, lingering scent of herbs used in the day's ablutions. You pause for a moment, inhaling deeply, letting the aromas mingle: rosemary from the garden, lavender from the evening baths, and the subtle tang of worn stone. Historians still argue whether these scent choices were primarily medicinal or deeply symbolic, Yet for you, the fragrance seems to mark the transition from labor to rest. A novice hurries past, carrying a wicker basket filled with folded linens. The cloths are still warm from the day's laundering, and the movement of the basket creates a soft rustle against the quiet stone walls. You notice how every step in the monastery has a purpose, from sweeping the corridors to arranging candles, creating a seamless choreography of life in service and discipline. There's a rhythm here that outsiders rarely perceive, a subtle cadence of efficiency and reverence intertwined. Ahead, a small alcove serves as a wash station for hands before the night meal. A single basin of water rests atop a wooden stand, herbs floating in its surface to cleanse and scent simultaneously. You watch as a monk lifts water carefully, washing hands with deliberate precision, each motion measured. Even these small, seemingly mundane acts are steeped in ritual, blending utility with spiritual awareness. Every gesture, every careful movement, feels like an echo of centuries of habit, repeated and refined over generations. Passing through a doorway, you see a low chamber where two monks are quietly mending clothing by candlelight. Their faces are illuminated with warm hues of saffron and russet, and their fingers move nimbly through needle and thread. The hum of soft conversation blends with the scratching of needles, a sound that seems to echo in the cool stone, creating a backdrop of quiet domesticity. Here, even repair work is a form of devotion, a reflection of care for both self and community. A young monk sets a small brazier near the edge of the room, adding a few twigs to maintain warmth. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows across the walls, and the subtle scent of burning wood mingles with the medicinal aroma of herbs. You notice how heat, light, and scent are carefully calibrated, each element reinforcing comfort without indulgence. Monastic life, even at its simplest, is a delicate balance between austerity and human necessity. In another corner, a novice carefully arranges small clay vessels filled with scented vinegar and herb mixtures, designed to purify the air. You pause, intrigued by the meticulous attention to detail, each vessel positioned at precise intervals to maximize effect. The practice reflects the medieval understanding of disease and cleanliness, blending superstition, observation, and ingenuity into tangible action. It's strange to witness such care applied to something that modern sensibilities might dismiss as quaint, yet it carries weight and significance here. The corridor opens into the dormitory. Rows of straw mattresses are aligned neatly against the stone walls, each marked with simple linens and personal possessions. A monk lays out a small cloth, smoothing it carefully before climbing onto his bed, the action deliberate and ritualized. You can feel the underlying structure. Even in rest, there is order, discipline, and mindfulness. Sleeping is not merely a biological necessity here, but an extension of daily practice. Nearby, a small window reveals the night sky, stars twinkling faintly through the lattice. You notice how light and darkness are both allies and teachers in monastic life, guiding activity and rest. Shadows fall across the chamber in measured angles, a natural rhythm that reinforces the structured pace of life within these walls. There's an elegance to this simplicity, a quiet poetry in the daily negotiation with the natural world. A monk adjusts a candle in a sconce, letting its warm light illuminate the alcove where a bowl of water rests for morning ablutions. Even the smallest tasks are infused with mindfulness, reflecting a philosophy where every action, however mundane, carries purpose and reflection. You notice how utility, ritual, and aesthetic coexist, shaping an environment that nurtures both body and spirit. In a corner, a novice carefully fans incense from a small cone, letting the fragrant smoke drift across the room. The scent is subtle but pervasive, weaving through the stone and linen, imparting a sense of calm and spiritual focus. It's fascinating to watch how even sensory experiences, scent, sight, and touch, are intentionally managed to reinforce contemplation, devotion, and ritualized behavior. You observe a solitary monk seated cross-legged on his mattress, eyes closed, hands resting on knees, breathing in time with a flickering candle. There's a quiet intensity to his posture, a discipline honed by years of practice. Even silence is structured, a medium for meditation, reflection, and preparation for sleep. You wonder whether the act is purely spiritual or partly a strategy to sustain mental balance amid rigorous daily routines. Another novice gently rolls a straw mattress, adjusting the alignment to maximize comfort without disrupting the room's symmetry. Each movement is careful, deliberate, almost meditative. You appreciate the mindfulness embedded in these chores, seeing how even small acts of maintenance are elevated to ritual. In this way, discipline and care converge, shaping not only the environment but also the monk's internal state. At the far end of the dormitory, a low shelf holds clay pitchers of water, herbs, and linens for the next day. A monk methodically checks each item, ensuring readiness for morning ablutions and tasks. You sense a continuity here, an interwoven thread of preparation that extends life beyond the immediate moment, connecting today's work to tomorrow's obligations and rituals. The final candle is lit near the dormitory entrance, casting long shadows along the stone walls. You notice how the placement of light, the careful arrangement of objects, and the scent of herbs work together to create a harmonious space conducive to rest, reflection, and spiritual focus. Even the ordinary becomes extraordinary when framed within such intention. As you settle into your own mattress, the sounds of quiet breathing, soft footsteps, and distant night birds create a gentle lullaby. You feel the rhythm of monastic life settle into you, the balance of labor, ritual, and rest. Even as darkness envelopes the dormitory, there's an underlying current of structure, mindfulness, and subtle sensory awareness that threads through the night, preparing body and spirit for the coming day. The morning begins with a chill that creeps into your bones as you step out of the dormitory, the stone floor still damp from last night's cleaning and the cool night air. A faint fog drifts over the monastery grounds, curling around the cloisters and blending with the lingering aroma of herbs and wood smoke from the kitchen hearth. You can feel the moisture in the air, clinging to your tunic and chilling your arms, a subtle reminder that the day's discipline begins long before the sun rises. Historians still argue whether monks chose their morning ablutions primarily for health or as an exercise in ritualized self-control, yet for you, the act feels both refreshing and slightly intimidating. The first task is the communal washing of hands and faces. You join the line of novices at a long trough, each of you dipping fingers and palms into water infused with crushed rosemary and lavender. The scent is gentle, earthy, and surprisingly comforting, a natural perfume that prepares you for prayer. There's a kind of choreography here, a silent agreement on timing and spacing that ensures efficiency while maintaining reverence. You notice the youngest novices fumble with the wooden ladles, water spilling slightly onto the flagstones, and you can't help a small smile at their clumsy enthusiasm. The prior calls the monks to the chapel with a muted wooden bell, its tone low and deliberate. You follow the procession, passing cloisters lined with tapestries depicting saints and scenes of daily labor. Each figure on the wall is rendered with a careful flatness, bright colors, and gilded edges that catch the soft morning light. The repetition of saints and allegories feels both meditative and grounding. You're reminded that every motion within these walls, even walking to prayer, is imbued with centuries of tradition. Inside the chapel, the air is cool and carries a faint metallic note from the iron candle sconces. You take your place on a kneeling bench, the wood smooth under your palms, and glance around at your fellow monks. Their faces are serene, almost masked by the steady rhythm of inhalation and exhalation, and yet you detect subtle individuality, a nervous twitch here, a fidgeting finger there. The chant begins, low and melodic, the Latin words rolling in waves, a collective sound that binds the monks together in sound and purpose. You feel a strange warmth from the shared vibration, the way it seems to pulse through your chest and out to the tips of your fingers. After prayer, you retreat to the refectory for breakfast. The long wooden tables gleam with fresh straw mats, and the scent of baked bread mingles with warm porridge. A monk ladles thick, creamy oat gruel into your bowl, and you notice the attention given to every portion, ensuring both nourishment and fairness. Small quirks abound. A novice drops a spoon with a soft clatter, another quietly sneaks a piece of dried fruit from the communal basket. It's mundane, yet fascinating, how even these small acts are governed by an unspoken code of conduct and respect. Breakfast over, the work assignments are posted on a rough-hewn wooden board. You trace the list with your eyes, tending the herb garden, cleaning the cloisters, preparing ink and parchment for the scriptorium. There's no complaint, no negotiation. The hierarchy is absolute yet gentle, a blend of authority and understanding that keeps the monastery functioning smoothly. The daily rhythm is clear. Each task, however trivial, contributes to the greater spiritual and physical well-being of the community. You head to the herb garden first, inhaling the scent of mint, sage, and thyme as you kneel to weed and water the plots. Your hands quickly grow damp and earthy, the soil soft under your fingers. There's a meditative quality to pulling weeds and arranging sprigs, a tactile reminder that labor can be both practical and spiritually nourishing. Some herbs are reserved for medicine, others for scent in water or oil. The care you take feels important beyond the immediate act, a preparation for future rituals and remedies. A scribe passes by with a bundle of freshly cut lavender, offering a polite nod. You notice the gentle sway of his stride and the quiet determination in his expression, a visual representation of centuries of practice and training. Even casual interactions carry layers of meaning, respect, acknowledgement, and subtle mentorship. You try to mirror this rhythm, moving with careful deliberation through the garden, attuned to the scents, sounds, and textures around you. Nearby, a young novice struggles to lift a water bucket from the stone fountain. You step over to offer guidance, demonstrating how to tilt it carefully to avoid spillage. He follows your movements with wide-eyed concentration, and for a moment you sense the shared thread of knowledge and care that sustains this microcosm. Historians still argue whether medieval monastic education focused more on manual skill or spiritual discipline, yet here, the lines blur beautifully. By mid-morning, the sun begins to burn off the fog, warming the stone walkways and casting sharp lines of light across the cloisters. You feel the energy shift subtly, the cool, contemplative mood of dawn yielding to the brighter, more active pace of daytime chores. The monks move in silent synchrony, yet each motion is purposeful and grounded, a combination of habit, instruction, and intuition honed over years. Your attention turns to a small clay vessel, half filled with scented vinegar, which you carry to the kitchen. The aroma is strong but pleasing, intended to purify the air and maintain hygiene in an age before germ theory. You wonder about the medieval understanding of cleanliness, how superstition and observation merged to guide daily practice. It feels oddly comforting to see such intentionality in every corner of life, even in something as mundane as carrying vinegar to the hearth. Returning to the dormitory to fetch a basket of linens, you observe a novice quietly arranging straw mats with meticulous precision. Each mat aligns with its neighbor in perfect symmetry, a visual and tactile order that reflects the monastery's broader philosophy: attention to detail, mindfulness, and devotion in even the simplest acts. You can almost hear the echo of centuries, the rhythm of countless hands performing the same tasks, layering habit into ritual. As the morning progresses, the abbey hums with quiet energy, with scraping against stone, soft voices reciting prayers while folding laundry, the faint clinking of metal tools in the workshop. You feel embedded in the flow, moving naturally from task to task, aware of the interconnection between labor, contemplation, and spiritual practice. There's an elegance in this continuity, a subtle art in orchestrating life to balance human needs with devotion. Finally, a small bell signals the end of the first round of chores. You pause to look over the cloister garden, the sunlight now fully illuminating the leaves, herbs, and pathways. The serenity and precision of monastic life strike you again. Even the small, practical details, watering plants, arranging linens, carrying vinegar, contribute to a rhythm that is at once grounded and transcendent. The midday sun warms the monastery walls, creating patches of light that dance across the flagstones, flickering through the carved arches and reflecting off small puddles left from morning chores. You carry a basket of herbs to the infirmary, each bundle tied neatly with twine, the scent of lavender, rosemary, and thyme mingling in the air like a living perfume. It's a small comfort, these aromatic reminders of nature and routine, even as you're aware of the underlying strictness of every motion, every breath, in this medieval world. Historians still argue whether monastic herbal medicine was more effective than superstition, yet the careful preparation of these plants demonstrates the dual nature of knowledge and ritual. Entering the infirmary, you are greeted by the soft murmur of a novice reading aloud from a medical text while tending to a minor wound on a fellow monk's arm. The air is thick with the smell of vinegar, dried herbs, and warm clay from the stone walls, a mixture that is oddly reassuring. You hand over a bundle of sage and watch the careful ritual of applying poultices, noting how every gesture is deliberate, precise, and practiced. There is a quiet artistry to the work, even as the necessity of cleanliness and survival underpins every motion. After helping with the herbal treatments, you move to the scriptorium. The faint scratching of quills on parchment greets you, accompanied by the subtle rustle of pages as monks copy texts. Sunlight spills over the tables, illuminating gold leaf on the margins and tiny illuminations that shimmer with the slightest movement. You can feel the weight of history in the room, the continuity of knowledge, the slow accumulation of human thought preserved by careful hands. Some texts are sacred, others mundane, yet each demands reverence. The scent of ink, chalk, and wood is faintly intoxicating, grounding you in this secluded, disciplined world. A master scribe notices your curiosity and gestures for you to observe his technique. He dips the quill into ink, pauses, and then inscribes a letter with fluid precision, the line perfect and unbroken. You follow the rhythm, feeling an almost hypnotic calm as you trace letters in the air with your finger, imagining the centuries of novices who have performed the same motions. It's tedious, yes, but there's a meditation in repetition, a serenity in mastery. Quirky monastic facts come to mind, like how some monks colored ink with crushed insects or minerals, an odd fusion of chemistry and devotion. Lunch is announced with a small bell, and you join the monks in the refectory once more. The tables are laden with hearty bread, porridge, cheese, and occasionally salted fish. You take your place silently, eyes drawn to the ritualized manner in which each monk receives food, the careful moderation, and the unspoken rules of sharing. There's a subtle hierarchy even here. Seniors served first, novices at the edges, yet the communal act binds everyone together. You sip from a wooden cup, the water slightly metallic, and marvel at how even basic hydration becomes meaningful in this structured environment. Conversations are minimal, but gestures speak volumes. A nod, a smile, a brief comment on the weather or a task completed. You notice the layered complexity in these interactions, how trust and observation are as important as speech. A young novice struggles to cut a slice of bread, fumbling slightly, and you can't help offering a small, quiet tip. The gratitude in his eyes is subtle yet profound, an acknowledgement of shared human effort within the monastic system. After the meal, you help sweep the refectory. The broom scratches rhythmically against the stone, a percussive accompaniment to your thoughts. You observe how even simple labor reinforces discipline, grounding the mind while the body remains engaged. Historians still argue whether such tasks were primarily about spiritual growth or practical necessity, but here, in the quiet focus of sweeping and arranging, the distinction feels less important. The act itself becomes its own meditation. Returning to the cloisters, you notice small signs of creativity amidst the rigor. Tiny carvings etched into wooden benches, patterns scratched into window frames, subtle flourishes in the scribe's work, all moments where personal expression breaks through the rigid structure. You pause to appreciate them, sensing that these quiet acts of individuality are treasured, even if unspoken, in a community devoted to collective order. Mid-afternoon brings the call for manual labor outdoors. You grab a basket of laundry and step into the sun-warmed yard, carrying linens that will be hung to dry along ropes strung between posts. The fabric flutters in the breeze, releasing faint scents of lavender and water, a simple sensory pleasure after hours of meticulous tasks. Each movement, pinning cloth, adjusting lines, arranging bundles, is precise yet graceful, a dance of necessity and care. You overhear snippets of conversation among the novices, hushed talk about herbs, chants, and superstitions. One mentions a remedy involving crushed peppermint leaves, another recalls a local legend about a ghostly figure that cleansed sins with water. You smile quietly. Folklore and practice are intertwined here, forming a tapestry that is both educational and whimsical. Even within discipline, there's room for imagination. Later, you join a small group tasked with tending the orchards. Trees are pruned carefully, the ground cleared of weeds, and fallen fruit gathered for later consumption. You notice how each task, though mundane, is layered with knowledge. Which branches to cut, which soil to loosen, how to protect young saplings from frost. The rhythm of labor feels almost sacred, each action part of a long chain connecting past, present, and future. As evening approaches, shadows lengthen across the monastery walls. You take a moment to sit beneath a tree, hands still faintly fragrant from herbs, and listen to the distant sound of bells signaling vespers. The air is warm, soft, and filled with the sense of earth, stone, and foliage. You feel the weight of routine and ritual blending into a sense of contentment, a recognition that even in austere settings, life carries small pleasures and patterns of beauty. You rise and return indoors for evening chores. The cloisters are quiet, light fading through the arches, and the wooden doors creak softly as you pass. You notice the subtle interplay of duty and reflection, the way every motion is deliberate yet meditative. In these final hours before nightfall, there's space to observe, to appreciate, and to internalize the lessons of rhythm, patience, and attentiveness that the monastery instills. Finally, you pause at the dormitory doorway, the day nearly complete. The scent of herbs, wood, and stone lingers, a subtle reminder of the day's labor and learning. You feel a quiet satisfaction in the small victories, tasks completed with care, rituals followed, knowledge absorbed. There's a sense that even minor gestures, washing hands, arranging linens, pruning herbs, contribute to a harmony that has been cultivated over centuries. You take a deep breath, the air cool against your skin, and allow yourself a moment of calm before night settles fully. Night drapes itself over the monastery, softening the edges of stone walls and cloisters into shadowy silhouettes. You walk barefoot along the cool flagstones toward the chapter house, where a single candle flickers on the altar, casting long, wavering light across carved wooden benches. The air is dense with the combined scent of beeswax, herbs, and faint smoke from the hearth, a comforting mixture that speaks of centuries of devotion and quiet labor. You notice the small imperfections, the rough-hewn edges of the benches, tiny chips in the stone, and yet, in this dim light, everything feels purposeful, deliberate, and perfectly aligned with the rhythm of monastic life. Historians still argue whether monks truly found spiritual fulfillment in such austerity, or whether it was a carefully constructed social mechanism, but as you move through the quiet halls, the distinction seems irrelevant. Inside the chapter house, a few senior monks sit with hands folded, eyes closed in silent reflection, while others murmur soft prayers, the sound echoing gently against the high vaulted ceiling. You join the rows, careful not to disturb the solemn cadence, and feel the sense of communal ritual envelop you. The flickering candlelight illuminates small gilded details in the architecture, hinting at a richness that contrasts with the overall simplicity of the space. Here, austerity and artistry coexist, each highlighting the other. The air feels almost tangible, dense with history, devotion, and faint traces of incense that linger from earlier ceremonies. After the chapter meeting, you wander to the monastery kitchen to help prepare a small supper. The low fire burns steadily under a large cauldron of broth, releasing savory aromas that mingle with the faint tang of dried herbs. You chop onions and carrots, careful not to disturb the rhythm of those already at work. There's a quiet camaraderie here, a blend of efficiency and companionship that mirrors the larger structure of monastic discipline. Even as tasks are mundane, the environment encourages mindfulness, a focus on the present, and a subtle awareness of centuries of tradition. You note that some monks add small touches of unusual spices, cloves or saffron, to elevate the otherwise simple meal, a nod to creativity within constraint. Once the meal is served and quietly consumed, you take your share to a small corner near the herb racks. The night outside has grown colder, and you pull a thin woolen cloak tighter around your shoulders. You watch shadows stretch along the walls, cast by candlelight flickering against jars of dried rosemary, sage, and lavender. The interplay of light and shadow creates a meditative rhythm, and you find your thoughts wandering gently, as if in conversation with the centuries of monks who have walked these halls before you. Quirky facts drift into your mind, like how some monks believed hanging garlic near the hearth kept away not only pests but also bad spirits. Such customs may seem odd now, but they underscore the intertwining of practical knowledge and ritualized belief. Later, you assist with the nightly water ritual, filling small clay jugs for hand-washing and purifying communal spaces. The water is cold, but the act carries both literal and symbolic significance, a reminder of cleanliness, discipline, and shared responsibility. You notice how each movement is performed with care, the slow tilt of a jug, the careful rinse of a basin, the respectful return of tools to their proper place. Even in routine labor, there is grace, intention, and mindfulness, a subtle lesson in humility and interconnectedness. Walking back to your dormitory, you pass the small scriptorium one last time. A novice sits alone, quill poised over parchment, copying prayers with deliberate strokes. The dim candlelight makes the gold leaf shimmer faintly, and you marvel at the patience and concentration required to produce such intricate work. Each letter is a meditation, each line a bridge between devotion and artistry. You reflect on how even the simplest tasks, performed with care and focus, acquire significance over time. Historians still debate the psychological impact of such meticulous work on monks, but from where you stand, it seems to offer a unique, quiet satisfaction, a combination of discipline, creativity, and spiritual grounding. Before sleep, You make your rounds to check on the herbs and small potted plants scattered near the windows. The night air smells faintly of dew and soil, a stark contrast to the daytime aroma of drying linens and cooking fires. You gently water each plant, mindful of the limited resource, feeling a tiny sense of guardianship and connection. There is something profoundly human in this attention to detail, a reminder that even in a life devoted to spiritual abstraction, care for the tangible world remains essential. Finally, you climb into your straw-filled mattress, the cold seeping briefly before the layers of wool provide warmth. The faint scents of herbs, wood, and candle wax linger in the air, wrapping you in a comforting embrace. Your mind drifts through the day's events, the labor, the rituals, the quiet camaraderie, the small rebellions of creativity, and you notice a calm settling in. Even as the monastery enforces strict routines, you sense freedom in structure, contentment in repetition, and subtle joy in shared human experience. The night feels protective, enveloping, a gentle pause before dawn reawakens the rhythms you've come to know. Dawn creeps over the monastery walls with a delicate, golden haze, turning the dew on the courtyard stones into tiny, flickering gems. You step outside, taking a deep breath of crisp morning air that smells faintly of straw, damp earth, and smoke from the baker's oven. The silence is profound, broken only by a distant crow or the occasional scurry of a mouse among the hedges. You walk toward the infirmary, curious to see the daily routines of care and vigilance that often go unnoticed. The air carries a faint tang of herbs, sage, rosemary, and dried thyme, reminders of centuries of folk wisdom layered over monastic discipline. Historians still argue whether the strict rules about hygiene and isolation in monasteries actually prevented disease, or whether their effectiveness was more a product of communal adherence than medical understanding. Inside the infirmary, a few monks attend to the sick, their movements precise, deliberate, and strangely gentle. Wooden bowls of warm water steam faintly in the cold morning air, while bandages are carefully soaked in vinegar and herbs before being applied to patients' wounds. You notice the hierarchy of care. The older, more experienced monks move with quiet authority, guiding novices with whispered instructions. The atmosphere is a mix of efficiency and empathy, where every action, from tilting a bowl to moistening a cloth, is imbued with intention and subtle ritual. Quirky facts drift into your mind, like how some monasteries believed that the careful placement of candles near patients not only soothed spirits but also warded off contagion, a blend of superstition and early empirical observation. You wander to the herb garden outside, where rows of lavender, rosemary, and mint stretch neatly between low stone borders. A young novice kneels, snipping sprigs for the infirmary, and greets you with a soft nod. You notice the care taken to conserve water, each pour deliberate, each plant nurtured for both medicinal and culinary purposes. There is a rhythm here that mirrors the structured hours of prayer, labor, and reflection, a cadence designed to align human activity with spiritual discipline. You crouch to inspect a patch of peppermint leaves, inhaling the faintly sharp scent, and marvel at the centuries of knowledge preserved in these simple plants. Later, you help prepare meals for the infirmary. The kitchen is alive with low murmurs, the clinking of utensils, and the soft hiss of boiling water. You chop vegetables for a hearty porridge, adding tiny amounts of dried herbs that are believed to strengthen the body and spirit, a curious intersection of nutrition and superstition. Even mundane tasks are ritualized. Bowls are washed in stages, herbs crushed with care, and each dish blessed silently before serving. You feel the subtle satisfaction of contributing to the well-being of others, a lesson in service that feels simultaneously spiritual and profoundly human. Historians still debate how much of this care was motivated by true compassion versus strict adherence to monastic rules, but standing here, the distinction seems almost irrelevant. as mid-morning approaches, you return to the cloisters, noticing the play of light through the stone arches and the shadows that stretch lazily across the flagstones. A gentle breeze carries the scent of herbs and polished wood, mingling with the faint smoke from hearth fires. You pause to watch the bell ringer climb the tower, his movements precise and unhurried, each toll marking the rhythm of communal life. It strikes you how even small tasks, ringing a bell, tending a plant, arranging a bowl of water, are infused with meaning, serving as anchors in a highly ordered world. You sit quietly in the scriptorium, watching as scribes prepare ink and parchment. The smell of dried ink and vellum fills the air, and you notice how each tiny flourish, each careful stroke, is a meditation in motion. Some monks hum softly, while others whisper prayers under their breath, creating a gentle symphony of sound and purpose. You marvel at the patience required, and recall quirky anecdotes, like monks using crushed pearls and ink to produce shimmering lettering for illuminated manuscripts. Such extravagance seems almost whimsical in a life defined by austerity, yet it speaks to the human desire to create beauty, even under constraint. By noon, the sun is high, illuminating the cloisters in stark contrast to the dim corners of the scriptorium. You follow the ritual of midday washing, carefully pouring water over your hands, rinsing the face, and performing silent blessings. Each movement feels intentional, even sacred, connecting physical cleanliness with spiritual focus. You notice the interplay of light on stone and wood, the flicker of candle flames reflecting in polished metal bowls, and the subtle scent of herbs and soap, grounding you in the sensory richness of monastic life. Historians still argue whether such meticulous hygiene routines actually influenced broader health outcomes or simply reinforced the structure and obedience expected within cloistered walls. Afternoon drifts lazily through the monastery, carrying with it a warm, golden light that spills across the cloister gardens, highlighting dew-flecked herbs and the worn stones of pathways trodden by countless feet. You stroll among the rows of lavender, sage, and thyme, inhaling their soothing, earthy aromas, each plant a miniature repository of centuries-old wisdom. Monks pass by with quiet nods, some carrying small bundles of herbs to the infirmary, others balancing wooden trays with bowls of porridge, bread, or herbal infusions. The hum of life is steady but hushed, a rhythm shaped by necessity, devotion, and subtle hierarchy. You notice how even the simplest acts, cutting herbs, stirring a pot, or tilting a bowl, are performed with intention, as though the care itself conveys a kind of silent devotion. Historians still debate whether this deliberate attention to daily chores was primarily spiritual discipline or an early form of hygiene and wellness strategy. You pause near the washing area, where water is carefully measured, heated over small braziers, and fragranced with herbs. The air carries a faint mixture of rosemary, lavender, and warm metal, creating a subtle, calming scent. Two novices lean over a shared tub, quietly splashing water on their hands while whispering about chores, the small rebellion of gentle laughter breaking the strict rhythm of silence. Children, or perhaps younger novices, peer curiously from the edge of the courtyard, observing without intruding, learning through mimicry the proper handling of water, the respect for cleanliness, and the rituals tied to daily life. The juxtaposition of play and ritual underscores the human adaptability that permeates monastic life. Later, you follow the monks to the herb drying room, a small, airy chamber where bundles hang from wooden beams, leaves brittle but fragrant. You gently crush a sprig of mint between your fingers, savoring the sharp scent, and marvel at how preservation techniques, while practical, are intertwined with centuries of superstition and medical theory. Some monks believe that properly dried herbs retain not only their flavor and healing properties but also protective qualities against miasmas, a curious blend of empirical observation and spiritual precaution. Small handwritten notes pinned to the beams instruct novices on the precise timing and handling, a testament to centuries of accumulated trial, error, and adaptation. You wander toward the chapter house, drawn by the sound of soft voices and the rustle of robes. Monks gather to read aloud, recite prayers, or discuss matters of discipline. The tone is contemplative, the atmosphere almost tangible, charged with shared understanding and reverence. Even the act of cleaning or arranging benches is ritualized, each gesture echoing the larger rhythm of monastic life. You note the subtle interplay of hierarchy and cooperation. Older monks guide novices with patient gestures, while novices offer small services that are both educational and contributory. By mid-afternoon, the sun softens, casting long shadows across stone floors and cloistered gardens. You pause to watch a monk quietly scrape soot from a hearth, the rhythm meditative, almost musical. You feel the texture of the moment, the warmth of sun on your skin, the faint scent of herbs and smoke, and the soft murmur of footsteps and whispered prayers. Even seemingly mundane chores, scrubbing pots, tending fires, or arranging herbs, carry layers of meaning, discipline, service, and spiritual reflection. Historians still argue whether the meticulous routine of such labor was primarily about obedience, health, or the cultivation of inner tranquility, but standing here, the distinction feels almost irrelevant. As late afternoon fades, you wander back through the cloisters, noticing the subtle changes in light, the quieting of activity, and the way shadows stretch across the flagstones. A bell tolls gently, marking the approach of evening prayers. You pause at a small fountain, watching the water glint in the waning light, and marvel at how a simple element, water, carries both practical and symbolic weight in this life. The rhythm of hygiene, work, devotion, and reflection flows seamlessly together, each action reinforcing the other, a delicate dance between the mundane and the sacred, the corporeal and the spiritual. You settle into the quiet of the monastery as the day finally releases its grip, the long shadows stretching across stone floors like lazy cats. You notice how the walls seem to hum with the memory of chants, the faint scent of beeswax from candlelight mingling with the cool, damp air. It's a kind of stillness that presses gently against your ears, as if the world itself is holding its breath. In this final stretch of your nightly wanderings through the oddities of monastic life, you reflect on the strange but disciplined routines that have guided these monks for centuries, the way their unusual rules shape every twitch of their day, every deliberate step of their hands, and even their sleep. You remember the bizarre punishments, the nocturnal vigils, the strict meal orders that dictate exactly when and how much to eat, rituals so detailed that some monks would probably measure their own size if permitted. And yet, there's a calm precision to it all. Even the quirks, like sleeping with certain pillows arranged a specific way, or walking barefoot to remind themselves of humility, have a rhythm that, surprisingly, feels almost like music. Historians still argue whether these routines were more for spiritual enlightenment or social control, but for you, watching them unfold in your imagination, the answer feels like a mix of both. The evening stretches onward, the lamps flickering and shadows dancing across the stone corridors. You feel the weight of centuries pressing lightly on your shoulders, imagining the echo of whispered prayers bouncing between walls, the occasional rustle of a robe in a corridor you'll never walk, and the disciplined order of a life devoted to something larger than oneself. The monk's world, strange as it is, pulses with intention, a heartbeat measured in careful movements and quiet obedience. You inhale, the mixture of candle smoke and musty stone filling your lungs, and for a moment, you feel part of it, part of the silent, structured devotion. As your eyelids grow heavy, you notice the softest details, a tiny mouse scuttling along the base of a wall, the glint of gold on a manuscript edge, the faint coolness of stone under your fingertips. The rules that once seemed absurd now feel like a kind of poetry, a slow, deliberate choreography of life and faith. Even as your mind drifts toward dreams, you carry the image of these monks, solitary and communal at once, meticulous, odd, yet profoundly human. The night deepens around you, gentle and unhurried, as if the world itself is exhaling. You feel the weight of your day dissolve into the quiet rhythm of candlelight flickering on stone walls, the soft sigh of wind through the monastery's eaves. Everything seems slower now. The way shadows bend across the floor, the way your breathing matches the stillness outside, and the faint echo of distant chants that have long since ended. It's a calm you haven't felt in hours, maybe days, and you let it settle over you like a warm blanket, comforting and familiar. Your mind drifts over the strange routines and rules you followed in thought tonight, imagining monks sleeping with measured breaths, dipping their hands in cold water for purification, or walking barefoot to remind themselves of humility. Each practice once seemed rigid or even absurd, but in the hushed night-time, there's a kind of rhythm, a gentle order that reassures you. Even the quirks, the strict meal hours, the midnight vigils, the precise folding of robes, blend into a lullaby of human intent, reminding you that discipline, however strange, can be tender. You notice the little details around you, the scent of beeswax, the faint chill of stone under your fingertips, the soft rustle of cloth, the way shadows curve like slow, sleepy waves. You imagine the world beyond the monastery, the village asleep, the fields resting, the rivers whispering to themselves. And here, in this suspended moment, you allow yourself to float with it, carried by centuries of quiet devotion and the gentle cadence of a life lived with purpose. Let your eyelids sink, your muscles relax, and your thoughts drift like incense smoke curling toward the ceiling. Remember the odd rules, the strange rituals, the discipline and the care. They are not burdens but a gentle guide, a soft thread connecting you to a world both distant and strangely familiar. Breathe in the calm, let it settle, and drift, slowly, gently, into sleep.